Today's agenda that we have for is understanding the release cycle tenants. There are different types of tenants that Workday has. There is a release cycle that follows through like a software update cycle. When is the software updated? And then how does the implementation happen? And once the implementation is completed, what is the different post-production for that? So we're going to talk about these things, and in in every particular topic, in addition to this, we'll also talk about the different roles that basically are there in the system, not in the system, different types of profiles that you can pick up and start applying, like as a business analyst, what will be. So we'll understand the roles and responsibilities of different job profiles within the Workday ecosystem. Like someone is a solution architect, someone is a senior consultant, someone as an analyst, someone as a business analyst, someone as a systems analyst. So we'll talk about a little bit brief on that as well. So this is our today's agenda, starting with the release cycle tenant. So we'll have to break it down into sessions now. So we'll start with the release cycle first. And you don't have to draw any visuals here. I'll draw the visuals. You can take a screenshot of it. Okay. We're talking about the release cycle. That is the first topic in our agenda today. So Workday is a software, and every software needs updates, right? Like your cell phones use particular operating system, which also needs an update, whether it's an iOS, whether it's an Android, whether it's Google. And we don't know what the timeline for those updates are, but we should know what timeline is when a software update happens within Workday. Okay, so as I was saying, like every software has its updates. Workday also have its updates, and there are two primary updates: one that come in March and one that come in September. You can see there's a gap of 6 months between both the releases, and just this month there was another release. Now, why are we discussing this particular topic and how important this is? This is important because you as Workday consultant are responsible to execute these testing. You will be the beta testers in your team, in your core Workday team, who will be responsible for making sure that whatever is being released in this particular cycle, whatever is used to you, you will use it. Whatever is not relevant to you, you won't test it. Now let's understand what is covered in any annual release. These are basically called as your biannual releases. You can exactly use this on your LinkedIn as well, in your resumes as well, that you orchestrated or you organized the biannual release sessions. Right? So you get to see new features. Okay. You get to see enhancements on the existing feature. You get to see bug fixes, report fixes, security fixes. I'm not sure how many of you ever looked into an Apple update. Like I'm an iPhone user, and I very stringently look into what updates are coming, and a lot of time there are these updates which are related to security fixes. And there are small bugs that they have found, something of those nature. So those are also part of your release. And in this release, what happens is Workday gives you a specific tenant. We'll talk about a tenant in the after this topic. So tenant is nothing but a Workday environment given by a Workday for which you have paid, and you use it for your own requirements, for your own purpose. But for this annual release, there is a specific tenant that we use. And the name of that tenant is Sandbox Preview. We'll come to You'll understand more about what this is when we'll talk about different tenants. But you get access to a different tenant sandbox preview 5 weeks before the release date. Let's say the release date in sometime mid-March. So 5 weeks from that, 5 weeks before that, somewhere in August, early August, or even last week of July, you will get this tenant will open up where you will log in and you will test all these things. So new features would be like Workday has developed something new, so they are launching it. You can decide that whether you want it or not. Enhancement would be like you're working on a business and there is an existing business process which got modified with an extended step. That could be an enhancement. Bug fixes. Where does the bugs come from? Bugs means your defects. Where does those come from? Those come from different customers. Like you are testing something and you realize it's not working as expected, even if the configuration is correct. So there is a possibility that Workday developers might not have set it up correctly. So you report that to Workday. That will be counted as a defect or a bug. And Workday's development team will go ahead, fix it, and depending upon which release they want to push it to production, they'll bring it here. And let's say in the September release, you have that bug fix. So it's your responsibility to make sure that you test your configuration accordingly, that you have done a good job in it. And report fixes, security fixes. There are certain audit reports, not certain, there are quite a few audit reports that we use to understand that do we need to change anything in our reports or security. So it's a lengthy process. It takes about a month and a half to get that done. And the next thing I'll discuss is how will you take part in it. You don't have to download anything. Everything is on the cloud. The only thing you need is a link and the right credentials to log in. That's all. Link to their specific tenant because all of these are on different instances on the cloud. It's not like Workday. Like Workday owns all the tenant, but once you are a customer of Workday, you are the new owner of that tenant. So the sandbox preview is with the company throughout the year. But Workday continue to work on this because they're releasing new items in it, in your sandbox preview tenants. That's why the access is locked down. And if you make a configuration change, then only your Workday team members who have access to this tenant will be able to see what you have done. Nobody else outside that will have visibility to it. You don't need any Workday consultant. Your company already registered with Workday. You are a customer. And someone from your team will be given certain extra credentials to connect with the Workday team now and then whenever there is a need for it. And they will be your customer relationship manager kind of thing. Now, how does this work? What's the process and how do we operate in it? Now, the most common way of doing this is when the release, there's a big file that comes out on Workday community whenever the release is happening. And that file is called the what's new file. You can make a note of it. It's called the what's new file. And when that file comes up, we download it. Like someone from the team who always takes lead on this testing, they download that file and they share it like on a shared drive, like a Google Drive, something, that, and it's a big Excel file. It will have with every release, there's more than 100 or 150 rows that gets added. Right now, I think it's somewhere around 700 to 800 rows in that file. And Workday is coming up with more features and enhancement ever upcoming releases. Now, what you do is, if you are a core HCM person, you'll filter on the core HCM features, enhancements, or fixes. If you're an absence person, you'll filter on those. If you're a time tracking person, payroll person, likewise, you'll filter on your relative area. And there is a column in the report which has three status. One is test now, one is test later, and the third one is test never. What happens is the lead downloads the file, you all set up a call, sit in a room, and you all do this activity together. Or in the virtual environment, everybody was asked to do that in their own time. But I think the best way is that you all get in a room, do a working session for about an hour or 2 hours, and filter out all the cases that needs to be tested now test it later or test it never. Test it never would be the cases where you don't use that functional area. Let's say you don't use Workday payroll, so there's no point for you to test any new features or enhancements or bug fixes on the Workday payroll side, right? That particular file that Workday delivers has all the new features, irrespective of if your company uses it or not. Okay. So you'll filter out. So test never, gone. You don't need that. The next thing is test later. Test later would be, let's say Workday released discovery boards back in 2022, which is a very good feature, but not many companies have adopted for it for many reasons. Though it's a very good feature, good functional area that Workday has added, but not all companies have the right resources or the time to work on something new because they're already neck deep in some cases, some enhancements. So you mark it as test later, giving a comment that this might be useful to us, but we'll test it later. Test it later means once Workday has done the release completely, like you can do it post March, you can do it post September, right? And you will still do it in sandbox preview because you still have, like, your company owns it now, you have access to it, you can use that tenant for that purpose, right? And then comes the test now. Test nows are those critical scenarios which you definitely make sure you test it out. And why do you need to test it out now? Because every company who's a Workday customer gets access to sandbox preview. And why there is a separate tenant for this release cycle is because this sandbox preview is nothing but a replica of your production environment. Your production environment is where all your live data is, all your company data live in that tenant, which all your employees go in, log their time off, or look at their payroll, update their personal information, new people get hired, like all happening real time. So this sandbox preview is a replica of it, plus the new features. So you have to make sure that with this release, whatever you're testing, whatever is critical to your environment, you test it out with the real-time data that you have, but in a test environment. So for every company, a sandbox preview will look different because it will be their company's data with those new enhancement in place. So you have to test it with real-time data. You don't have to create any test data or any dummy data. You will have your real company data in there in your test environment, which you will use to test all the scenarios, features, bug fixes. So you will mark them as test now. And I think everyone get about 2 weeks window to finish their testing. And it happens quite often that Workday has given you a particular, item in the sheet, which is not working as expected. So what you do is you go to community, you look into it, you research on it, and you will find some comments. If someone else is testing and they have experienced the same thing, they'll check on it. And Workday will get back to you that, this is something that might not have been fixed properly. They'll come back in the next release with it. So you will have to mark all of them. So when you finish your testing, which I was just mentioning that there might be scenarios where things have not been fixed properly. And there might be scenarios where you don't need it at that particular time, right? There is another column in that sheet which tells you that this feature is automatically available and this feature requires a setup. So the automatically available, irrespective of that, you will get those because those are required and they usually don't bring any tech debt for you guys because for any company, because they are backward compatible pretty much, right? If it's something that they are changing in the process, then that will be released as a new feature, right? And let's say for that new feature, it's marked as setup required. So you'll do the setup. You will see that this is not applicable to me, or maybe I can do it later. In that sheet only, you mark your comment that I need it later. And your company lead, who is in direct contact with Workday, they submit that sheet on a portal. And that is how Workday gets to know that this company needs these many features and not these ones. So those will not be released in your environment, in your real-time environment. Sandbox preview is the test environment that you will get access to do your release testing. This is that test environment that you will log into to test all these things. because the tenant is uploaded with all the new releases and all. And this is nothing but a replica fraud. Fraud means production. This is a real-time instance for any company. So ideally, like the purpose of sandbox preview is only during the release testing, but there can be exceptions where if you, let's say you have 5 other tenants also in your company and all of them has some or the other project running and you need to do a small testing of something, you can use it, not a problem. But don't make it a habit of it because Workday continues to update it with new enhancements and new features, and you would not know when the work that you have put in that tenant might get refreshed. So that's why we don't use it for any of our projects or anything. We only use it for testing purposes. So let's, before we get into different types of tenant, just want to check, are you clear what you will be doing in a release cycle? Because this is a very commonly asked topic in interviews, not in length, but they'll ask you, have you been part of the biannual release? Because a lot of the customers do not do a very good job in it, and probably they miss a lot on it. So you have to build a story around it, tell them that you took a lead on it, and you make sure that team did the job that they're supposed to do, and it was all in an organized manner, in a systematic manner, and we always follow a particular pattern in the company or a process. The first of all, you should remember that it comes in March and September. They might try to trick you. What about the other months? In other months, also there are small updates and features that come. But those are something, it's like you have iOS 16, you have iOS 16 1.01, 1.02. You won't really care about it. That's the same thing with Workday as well. Those fixes are primarily, some changes in the cloud setup and anything that does not impact your company information at all. Once in a blue moon, some change comes out of the blue, which might disrupt some of your working. Like not too long ago, a few months ago, Workday made a security change as part. There are also weekly changes that comes in, right? Workday made a change that employee ID will be more secured. Like you cannot just go in and search by an employee ID. They created a separate domain for it, and how it disrupted our environment, not just our everyone's, is that people were no longer able to search with employee ID. Like payroll team in any company is the most heavy user of employee IDs. They do not care about names. They need employee IDs. They were not able to search by it. So we found out that this was done in a weekly change, and we quickly made the change, tested it out, and we released it. So that was like a 2-day thing. But for 2 days, your system not working as expected is a big thing for any company. So yes, there are certain features which, if you mark it as test later, you can review those and see if this is something that you need in the near future, and then you can test it out. But we never care to check them or what's happening. But only once in a blue moon, if it disrupts any of the configuration, that is when we get to know, okay, something came in the weekly release also. So we work accordingly. There was a security domain that was added, and that was securing your employee ID. So what we did is we searched for it on community, what happened, and we realized not just us, everyone in the community as a customer got disrupted, and anyone who has resolved it, they post the answer there. We found out from those answers that this is the domain that they used. From that domain, we added the security groups for which we need to give access to. We tested it out in one of our environments, and then we put it into production. So this biannual release is why it is important. And like I said, you can put it on your LinkedIn as well. Just write in your headlines, Workday release or biannual release, anything, any word will work, because companies still, and there is an organization, its name is KNOS, who provide automation to these testing. It's like there will be no manual efforts, or like not a manual effort from the complete team, but a selected few who can help with the automation. And they have automated this release site, but they are very, very expensive. for an organization which is about like a global organization, they charge $500,000 just for that. Not all of them. The bug fixes, definitely enhancements, a few of them, but the new features are something which, every software updates something. Those are those new releases. So production tenant is where all your live data is. When an implementation is happening, that means when your company is transitioning from legacy system to Workday system, system means any older system to Workday system. And once everything is live, there is this tenant called as a production tenant where all your company data is. That's why I written it live. And during the implementation time, we also call it the gold tenant. And once this is set, like once your company has implemented Workday, you get access to other tenants also along with that, because this is like you need tenants to work on things, right? You need to maintain the system. So the very first tenant that you get access to is your sandbox, which you don't have to pay anything. This is an exact replica of production. And this has a refresh cycle, which is Friday, 6 p.m. PST, Pacific time. What do I mean by refresh is, let's say today is Monday. For some of you, it's Monday. You do all your testing for smaller items, smaller projects in Sandbox, like creating new reports, testing it out, working on small features and all, right? Every Friday, that will be gone and replaced by whatever we have, whatever happened in production. Like any new hires got added in the system. There were some reports that were added, some were deleted. So refresh every Friday. The system is down for 12 hours because the refresh is happening and Workday does it. Right? And the next Monday and the following Monday, your sandbox is again an exact replica of production. That's why we say anything you want to break it in sandbox. Anything you want to test it in sandbox. This is your playground. You can literally do anything. You can delete the CEO here. Nobody will care because the next Monday you will find that CEO. This is your real playground. Okay. But you can get an exemption for only 2 weeks. Let's say you're working on a project in this. For some reason, you are not able to finish it by the end of this week. Let's say I started a project yesterday in Sandbox, which is adding a new time off plan. I added it yesterday. Now the team is testing. For some reason, the team is not able to finish the testing by this Friday. Okay. And you cannot duplicate your effort by, waiting for it to refresh and then do that again next week. So what you do is you send a request to Workday that please do not refresh my tenant this week. And they'll exempt you. That means for 2 weeks, your tenant will not be refreshed. But the next week's Friday, there's nothing we can do. It has to be refreshed. That's Workday policy. You can only get an exemption for 2 weeks. Now, this is your sandbox, right? This is for your smaller initiatives, smaller things that you're working, like day-to-day troubleshooting. Something is not working as expected. You look into that. Now, there are other tenants for your bigger items, like you want to implement something new in payroll, or you have a new absence policy that you want to implement. You have a new benefits rule that you have to implement, which will definitely take you more than 1 week. Some take months, some take years. So in that case, there are different tenants, and those are your implementation tenants. We call them impl tenants, IMP. And this is you have to buy from Workday. Like in companies, some companies have two, some companies have five, some companies have seven. I've worked with all of these companies. right? Depending upon how many projects there are, what is the roadmap for your workday in your company. If you are, let's say, Workday, like I said, Discovery Board is one of the recent, not really from last year. It's one of the very good releases that Workday has. So at the time of release cycle, when you are doing this, you marked it as test later. Okay. Now you want to make sure that, now is the time you have the resource, you have the bandwidth, you can work on. So you will pick up an implementation tenant, start looking through community, how to set it up, how it works, and work on it. And let's say take about 3 months. Right. So today is September 26th. 3 months from now, which will be December 26th. Right. And let's say you put a go live date that, everything is done. January 1st, the New Year's Day, we launch it in production. So on January 1st, in fact, one day before, you will move all your configuration from this implementation tenant to production tenant. And once that is done, you will request Workday to refresh this. And once that refresh happens, refresh always happens from production. It's only one way. Refresh does not happen from implementation to production or from sandbox to production. It only happens one way. Okay, so now your implementation as of maybe January 2nd or that particular first week, whenever you put a request for refresh, your implementation tenant is now again a replica of your production, which means it's now brand new with the most up-to-date information, and you're all set to pick up new projects in it. And the third type of tenant that you already looked into, which we already discussed, is your sandbox preview, which is primarily used for your release cycle, release testing. We don't have to worry about any refresh cycle on this because it's all controlled by Workday. And this also has your company data, like your real-time data. There's another type of tenant. There are actually two more types of tenant, but one which you should know, and that is called your GMS. The full form of this is Global Modern Services. Everything is this tenant is fictitious. Global Modern Services is a Workday developed organization. It's not a real company. Workday has created a dummy company called as Global Modern Services, which is fictitious. Every employee in this is not real. And once you are a Workday customer, they give you access to this tenant where you can go in and see how Workday is set up. This is for your learning purpose. For example, in your company previously you were using ADP. You're very hands-on with ADP. Now your company has implemented Workday. How will you learn? How will you know how they do the work? So you will get access to GMS where you can go in and see, okay, this is how the setup is, and this is how you can leverage it. And GMS has most up-to-date features, enhancements, and everything. And you can log in any time of the day. But as and when you become more confident, more hands-on in the configuration, your usage of GMS will start to decrease because you will now know how to do hands-on. You have all the resources you need. You don't need any, reference to any tenants. But sometimes I still go here for time off queries because this tenant has the most recent configuration as per the basic policies. So it is helpful if you're confused that how to set it up. Like if you want to learn discovery boards, you can go in GMS also and see how they have done the setup. So not very commonly used on a day-to-day basis. Implementation and sandbox are the two tenants which we use on a day-to-day basis for our work. GMS once in a while when we need to do some research or we are working on something new. So these are the different types of tenant that we have.